You're listening to the Grassroots Church podcast. We're a Jesus-centered community in Thunder Bay, Ontario. You can learn how to participate more by going to our website at grassroots.church.
So this morning, I invite Brad, you can come on up, and as you do that, I don't know how you want to kind of set yourself up there. You can tweak the stage as you seem fit. As Brad does that, I'd just like to kind of provide a little bit of context on that. So we've been going through a series this summer, Parables of Jesus, and I don't think you're going to be sharing a parable this morning, but you're going to reference it, which is, you know what, close enough. But the idea of this series has been like, what are the lessons about living in the kingdom, and learning about what this king of this kingdom is like that Jesus teaches us through these object lessons in the Gospels. And so Jesus was a master storyteller. And to this day, 2,000 years later, we are still grappling with the parables that he shared and the implications, the stories, and the meaning behind these powerful stories. And to be able to do that, to be able to have that kind of impact, that kind of power that's a unique gift. And so Brad is coming from Guelph, and he reached out to me. Actually, he reached out to me last fall, maybe?
I think it was in the winter.
Or in the winter, sure. We reached out in the winter and said, hey, we're coming through Thunder Bay. This is what I offer church communities. Is this something that would work in your community? And at the time, it didn't quite align with kind of the direction and things we were doing, but he was coming through again this summer, him and his wife, Cynthia. Right, Cynthia?
Sylvia.
Sorry, Sylvia. Sorry about that. And so they were coming through, and they said, hey, we're coming through again. Would this work out? And I said, you know what? We're actually in the middle of this series on storytelling. And so this would work out exceptionally well. And so that's kind of why Brad is here this morning. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity for us to learn, not just about the art of storytelling, but, and maybe perhaps more so, the art of listening, which is a skill that I know I have, and you can ask Rhonda, she will confirm this, that I have severely lost over the years of distraction with my devices and all the things. And so I'm looking forward to just listening to what Brad has to say about this, both the art of storytelling and the art of listening. And so why don't I just say a quick prayer. Father, we give you thanks this morning again for this time. Thank you that Brad and Sylvia are able to join us and that we can listen to Brad as he shares from his heart and just about the gift of storytelling and the art of storytelling and listening. And Lord, something that I'm sure all of us need to work on to some degree or another. And so I pray, God, that our spirits would be open to what you have to share and speak to us through Brad. And I ask that you would just bless him in this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me here. My name is Brad Woods. It's an honor to be with you. It's always a thrill to be able to get up and talk about stories and tell stories and that sort of thing. So I appreciate you having me here. Steve, I appreciate you sharing your pulpit, so to speak, with me. It means a lot to me. I'm not crazy about being way up here on the stage. I feel like I'm way too far away, and typically, as it is in a church, nobody usually sits in the front row, which means you're even farther away. So I apologize for the distance. I'd rather feel like I was in amongst you, but that's what it is. I appreciate the informality of your community. I spilt half a cup of Robin's coffee all over my pants on the way here, just between here and there, wherever that Robin's Donut is, and I was like, oh man, now what? So I was glad to see that Steve had shorts and a ball cap. I was like, oh good, if I have to change, shorts aren't going to be the end of the world. But so you may notice it. It's probably even less offensive than the purse, having coffee all over my pants. But I think it's faded enough that we'll probably be okay. Just to be clear, I am not a minister or a pastor or a preacher or anything close to it. I'm just a storyteller, and that is why I'm here today. When I travel up into northwestern Ontario every summer and along the way find opportunities to tell stories. That's what I was doing here in April when we first connected at Sleeping Giant and at a house concert up on Candy Mountain and another church in town. So I get a wide variety of things. Over the years, I've had opportunities to tell stories in theaters and festivals and prisons and churches and pubs all over North America and the UK and even in parts of Europe and South Africa. And everywhere I go, people are always really quick to sort of pat me on the back and say, good for you for reviving the oral traditions, for keeping alive the lost art of storytelling. But the thing is, I don't think it is a lost art, because everywhere I go, I meet people with great stories and that are happy to tell them. The problem, I think, is finding people that are willing to listen. You know, what you were just sort of alluding to, Steve, I think in this sort of culture of sound bites and headlines and texts and tweets and everything else, we rarely just take the time to simply just sit and listen. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. I want to sort of celebrate the art of storytelling by sort of looking at it through the lens of the lost, what I call the lost art of listening. And I'm not doing this just to be different. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel by doing something different on a Sunday morning. As a matter of fact, I would argue that the art of listening is a significant part of the biblical narrative. I would argue that it's a really important part of the whole Christian tradition, that this idea of listening. And I have a couple of examples. I'm going to get Scott to read the first one for me. I guess there's a mic here if you want to use it. So listen as we hear from 1 Kings chapter 19, 11 to 13, when the prophet wants to hear from the voice of God.
The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?"
I love this. When the prophet wants to hear from the Lord, wants to hear the voice of God, right? And there's the wind, the mighty, massive wind, and earthquakes and fires, the big, the loud, the bright, everything that that sort of attracts us and gets our attention. Thank you, Scott, by the way. I appreciate that. And God isn't in the earthquake, and God isn't in the storm, and God isn't in the fire, the big and the bright and the loud. Not that he's not able, not that he's not powerful or strong enough, but it's in the gentle whisper, is what the verse says. It's what we know as the still, small voice of God. It's sort of not in the big and the bright and the loud. It's in between the distractions when we're going to hear from it. This is what I think the poet is referring to in Psalm 46:10 when he says, "Be still and know that I am God." When I was driving up here yesterday, I was reminded of an old story about two brothers. One's from the country and one's from the city. And the brother from the country goes to visit his brother in the city. And they decide to go out for a walk, just to chat and catch up and that sort of thing. And they come to a really busy intersection. And people are pushing and shoving and yelling and screaming, and lights are flashing and horns are honking, and tires and brakes are squealing. Motorcycles and cars are roaring through the intersection. Streetcars and trucks are thundering through. They can feel the rumble of the subway under their feet and the din of the construction overhead. It was so loud. It was so loud that they couldn't actually hear anything. And then all of a sudden, the brother from the country said, "Hey, listen, I think I hear a cricket." And his brother from the city said, "Are you crazy?" He said, "I can't even hear myself think out here. How could you possibly hear a cricket?" And he said, "Shh, listen real carefully." "Yeah, I hear a cricket." And he walked over to one of those cement boxes that they have on the sidewalk in the big city. They're filled with soil, and they have one spindly little tree growing out of them that makes the city so beautiful. He pushed aside a bunch of garbage, McDonald's wrappers and cigarette butts and that sort of thing. And sure enough, there in the dirt was a cricket. And his brother from the country said, "That's incredible." He said, "That's amazing. That's unbelievable. How do you do that?" And he said, "Well, it's nothing really. Watch this." And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of change, quarters and nickels and dimes, and he scattered them down onto the road in front of where they were standing. And every head on every corner stopped and stared. Every car in every direction came to a screeching halt. And he said, "See, if you listen really carefully, you hear what you want to hear. You hear what you would like to hear. You hear what you need to hear. Be still and know. Shh. listen very carefully. I want to take a minute and talk about the difference between hearing and listening. And there's a significant difference. We hear stuff all day long, right? We hear the alarm go to wake us up. We hear our kids waking us up before the alarm sometimes. We hear the kettle boiling. We hear our phone ringing when our friends are calling. The laughter at the lunch table in the staff room or in the office or the playground or whatever. If we're lucky, we hear crickets. But listening implies that we do something with what we hear, that there's some kind of reaction, some kind of response to what we hear. And again, this is a biblical thing. This isn't my idea. I'm going to ask Maddie, has agreed to read something as well. Come on up, Maddie. And thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. James talks about this, about the value of listening. So Maddie's Maddie's going to read to us from the first chapter of James, verses 22 to 24.
Do not merely listen to a word, and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but do not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror, after looking at himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently in the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do.
Thanks, Maddie. When I was a kid, it was never unusual for me to be sick. I was just one of those guys. I always had a fever or a runny nose or something. And my brothers, I'm the youngest of 3 boys. So my brothers always thought I was exaggerating, that I was milking it, so that I could get more than my fair share of our attention, the attention of our mother. And I remember one time when I was about 9 years old, I got really sick as I had been up to that point. Maybe as sick as I've been since then as well. It was horrible. Just to give you context, I was so sick that not only did I not stay in my bed, I didn't even go to the couch that was in front of the TV. I was so sick, I stayed on the uncomfortable Chesterfield in the living room under an Afghan just so that I could be within earshot of my mom. Now, if my brothers were annoyed with me, my dad was frustrated. Because now, while my mom was doting on me, he was scrambling around in the mornings, trying to get himself ready, burning toast and spilling coffee everywhere, trying to get out of the door on time. And I would just sit there shivering, shaking and shivering under the blanket on that couch in my little Toronto Maple Leaf pajamas. Now, to be fair, they weren't actually Toronto Maple Leaf pajamas. We were shopping at Byway in those days, for anyone that remembers Byway. So they were just generic blue and white pajamas with little hockey players on them, but because of my age, because of where I grew up, they were Toronto Maple Leaf pajamas. And I would spend my sick days with Daryl Sittler and Tiger Williams and Lanny McDonald. So this went on for a few days until I started missing school. And now my mom decided it was serious enough that I needed to go see the doctor. Now, she didn't drive in those days, and so my dad had to take a day off work to get me to the doctor's office. Well, if he was frustrated with me before, now he was full-on angry. Because not only was I messing with his morning routine, now I was interfering with his work schedule and potentially with his paycheck. But the next morning, my mom dutifully woke me up and said, "We got an appointment. You got to get out to the car. Dad's already out there waiting for you." And so I sort of shivered and shuffled my way out to the car and got in. And I remember he was already in there, the car was on, and I buckled myself up. And I remember we drove all the way to the Medical Arts Building, and he didn't say a word the whole time. I remember just staring at him out of the corner of my eye. Now, Dr. Phillips' office was on the 2nd floor of the Medical Arts Building. So I, of course, wanted to take the elevator, but my dad would have none of that. Made me walk up the stairs. I was basically crawling up the stairs after him. I felt so sick. And in these days, you could still smoke in the waiting room of a doctor's office. So I was already feeling gross, and now I couldn't breathe. The room was blue with smoke, and I was coughing and hacking. And when we finally got into my, the exam room, I'm in there sitting up on that bed on that crinkly paper, and I'm shivering, and my head is swimming, between the cigarette smoke and the smell of the antiseptic cleaner of the exam room. It was horrible. I felt horrible. And we weren't in there 2 minutes when he said to my dad, "You've got to get this kid to the hospital. He's got bronchitis and pneumonia. He's got bronchial pneumonia. Now, as horrible as I felt, and I felt horrible, I remember in that moment locking that into my memory, bronchial pneumonia. Because I thought, if I get through this, if I survive, if I live, and if I ever go back to school, and if any of the other kids notice that I haven't been at school, and if any of them ask me where I've been, and I get to say, I had to go to the hospital because I had bronchial pneumonia, I'm going to be a star, a rock star. I'm going to be a full-on schoolyard punk rock star. I mean, it's not as good as a scar, but it's better than a cast, right? But until then, now I'm not only feeling sick, I'm not only feeling nauseous, my head's not only spinning, now I'm terrified because I don't know what's going to become of this with this diagnosis. So now I'm terrified on top of all that. And now I don't know what's going to happen next. And I'm scared and I'm sick and I'm worried. And all of a sudden, my dad lifted me up. He didn't pick me up. He lifted me up. There's a difference. And he carried me down the stairs. Remember what it's like to be carried? By somebody who loves you? Yeah, it's amazing. He put me in the car, and he buckled me up. And we drove all the way over to the doctor's, to the hospital. Didn't say a word the whole way. He just stared at me out of the corner of his eye. And when they got me to the hospital, I was admitted, and I had to spend a week inside an oxygen tent, sort of teaching my lungs to breathe again. I was like John Travolta in The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, for any of you that remember John Travolta movies from before Face Off or Pulp Fiction or whatever. I love that story. I mean, it sounds sad. It kind of tells like a sad story. I get it, but it's not. You know, I don't mind that my brothers were annoyed with me, or that my dad would be mad at me, or that he made me walk up the stairs. The reason I love that story, the reason I remember it, the reason I want to retell it, is because of the way he reacted when he heard the truth. Look, we have heard from the prophets, the poets, an apostle, and what about Jesus? I think it's important in the church to consider what Jesus has to say about these things, what he has to say about listening. And in Matthew, right after he's done some teaching, Matthew 11, he says, "He who has ears, let him hear." Or in the Message, you know the interpretation of the Message, it says, "Are you listening? Are you really listening?" And then in Mark 4, he tells a story, one of his stories. I don't know if you've covered it yet, about the sower, where he sows the seeds, the way the plants grow up. And when he's done telling that story, he said, "Are you listening? Are you really listening?" And then in the book of Luke, chapter 14, he tells another story, the one about the banquet, the wedding feast. And at the end of that story, he says, you can probably guess, he says, "Are you listening? Are you really listening?" Okay, I think you probably see where I'm going with that. But I'm going to take a minute just to think about what is it that he wants us to listen to? What is it that he wants us to hear? And so let's take a second to look at one of his stories. Don't know if you guys have talked about the prodigal son during this summer yet. If any of you have spent any time in the church, you probably know this story, though. It's a common one, a well-known parable, obviously. A son of a rich man who's feeling very entitled, feeling very privileged, and decides he wants his inheritance early, asks his dad for it, and takes the money that's going to be coming to him eventually, and he goes out and spends it. Blows it, parties hard, living large, making all kinds of bad decisions. And when the money's gone, you know, then all the friends are gone too, and now he's got nothing. And now he's working horrible jobs just to make ends meet, and realizes he'd be better off going back and just working for his dad. And so he decides to go back, and on his way back, he's got an apology all planned, and he's going to ask for forgiveness, and he's going to beg for forgiveness, and can he just have a place on the farm, if nothing else? But of course, when the dad sees him, you know the story, the dad welcomes him back. There is no apology. There is no questioning, no blaming, no nothing. He just welcomes him back into the fold. It's great, right? It's a great story. Like, if that's what the church is about, I want to hear more stories like that. If that's what this faith is about, then sign me up. This is what I want to be a part of. It's a great story. The thing is, it's not a true story, is it? I mean, there was no prodigal son. There was no fattened calf. Jesus just made it up. So it's not true, but it's full of truth. And that's kind of the point, isn't it? Like that story about the cricket is not about the cricket. It's about our priorities, right? Where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. And that story about me being sick is not about me being sick. It's about finding the truth. And that the truth will set us free. And the story about the prodigal son is not about the prodigal son. It's about the father. And it's about how much the father loved his son. About how much the father loves his children. That no matter who we are, no matter where we are, and no matter what we're doing, we can always come back. We can always come back to the house. We can always come back to the family. And we will be accepted and loved and be celebrated. Are you listening? Are you really listening? I have one more story I want to tell along this lines of listening. But before I do, the reason I asked Scott and Maddie to read is when I get an opportunity to talk or tell stories or anything, I don't always want it just to be about me. I think of storytelling as the art of conversation. And so I just want to take a couple minutes if anybody has anything they want to say, if anybody has anything they want to ask, any questions, any comments, challenges, corrections. I just like when we get an opportunity to interact. So I'm not going to put any pressure on you, but just we'll take a minute to reflect on these stories, these passages and stuff. And if anybody has anything they want to say or add or ask, I would love to get some dialogue going, if that's okay. I don't know if a Q&A is normal here, but that's all right. Okay, good.
At this point, we've got a series of questions that the microphone didn't pick up. The first one was that a lot of Jesus' stories were challenging. What would be some challenging stories to tell to the modern society of Canada?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know that we recently, I perform often with 3 musicians, and we were doing a show recently. We did something on a Saturday night in a pub in Guelph, and we did something a Sunday morning in Toronto at a church. And we did a lot of the same material that we do in the pubs, we do in the church. And I remember somebody saying to us at the pub, that was really nervy. You guys show a real element of your faith and what you believe to do that in the pub. And somebody said in the church, that's really nervy to do that kind of stuff. You know, that the stories you tell, they're a little bit raw for the church. And so I don't know I don't know that the stories I tell challenge as much. You say that Jesus did. I'm certainly not Jesus, but I think I'm trying to get closer to something like honesty and integrity in my stories. That you were talking about the vulnerability when we worship. You know, I think of my stories. I think of our stories as another way to worship. And so a challenge is a good way to put it. I want to be somehow show honesty and integrity that will draw people to the stories I'm telling and see the truth. You know, Emily Post says, tell all the truth, but tell it slant. And sometimes I think that's what Jesus does too, is not just challenge, but like tells things on an angle, kind of challenging people to think about things in a different way. So even like the cricket story, which isn't very challenging, it isn't hard to hear, it does maybe make us think, oh yeah, what is important to me? What am I listening for? That sort of thing. I don't know, that's a bit of a long way around, but maybe that answers a bit. Yes, Steve?
The second question simply asks for some tips on telling better stories.
Yeah, I think we're all, I call myself a storyteller. We all are storytellers, whether we like it or not. It's one of the things that makes us human, right? Like, not everybody wants to be at the mic. Maddie, no offense, Maddie, but you were the third one we asked to read that. 2 people turned me down. You're the only one brave enough to do it. Right? A couple of people said, no, not me. So not everybody likes to be behind the mic. Not everybody likes to be up on a stage behind a microphone telling stories, but we're always telling stories in the car, in an elevator, at the bedside, coffee tables, and some of the best storytellers, I'm sure you'd agree, are not the ones that get up and preach or tell stories or politicians. Sometimes it's the quiet guy, the quiet uncle, your buddy who actually always has a great joke, but says it in a hushed tone. So I think certainly knowing yourself, knowing your personality, where your stories fit, but also the stories that connect with us are going to connect with somebody else. Like there's a universality to stories that we want to tell them. There's always something that we hear and go, oh, I got to tell my wife that one today. I got to tell my buddies. I can't wait to get to hockey tomorrow or whatever. There's that thing. So I think it's just, I think there's something about, being honest with yourself about the story. Now, certainly from telling a story, like crafting a story to get up on a stage or whatever, like anything, comes with experience. And you learn to do things the more you do it. Maybe the less we're texting and the more we're telling stories, or the less we're, the more engaged we are with each other, nose to nose and sort of eye to eye. We can't help but be telling stories. So the more we're interacting, the more we're building community and all that. There's a great author. One of my favorite authors is a guy named Frederick Buechner, a theologian, and he said, I hope I get this right, no matter who you are, no matter how eloquent or otherwise, if you tell your story with enough candor and concreteness, it will be a good story, and on some level, a universal one. So there's something about that, too. We tell stories sometimes. When I tell that story about being sick as a kid, as a parent, you probably hear it as a parent. If you don't have children, if you're still a child, you hear it from the child's point of view. So it's also the stories we tell are told depending on what we bring to the table. But I think we're always telling stories, so just believing in them, right? Telling the stories that are important to you, I think. And practice, experience like anything. Yeah. Yes?
For this question, the asker admits that sometimes she just listens in a conversation in order to get to her turn to speak, and she asks for some tips on learning to listen better and more authentically.
So that's just a bad habit, isn't it? Yeah. So I think I just said to Steve that you're sort of knowing ourselves and I think helps those sort of things. So whereas I'm similar, I'm happy to talk. I'm thrilled to give my opinions to people. I think everybody should be listening to me. So I think going into situations, being more self-aware, reminding yourself even, this is a time to listen. I just heard about a ministry in a church in Scotland. We were with a couple the other day, and they have a listening program where people only listen and you're not allowed to say anything. And so people for coming just to vent, talk about what's on their heart, whatever. And there's like 3 or 4 things they're allowed to say. Tell me more about that. That must be hard. I'm glad to hear it. There's 3 or 4 things, and that's it. And they get these half-hour sessions where people just come in and they volunteer to just sit and listen. And obviously it helps the person who's able to talk, but this gentleman that was telling us about it said it's incredible for him that and he's a surgeon, so he's a smart guy, a lot to offer in the world. And he said it's been incredible for him to know that, no, my role is just to listen. So, with all due respect, I don't mean to sound rude, it's kind of a choice. You have to make that choice. Am I going to respond, or am I just going to bite my tongue and listen now? But again, practice, experience. If you think that's important, then something you work on doing, maybe. Yeah. Yes?
In his final question, a member of the congregation relates that when she goes to the doctor doesn't seem to listen authentically and instead moves immediately to prescribing medication.
Yeah. It's true. So that's a tough one. So you're right. When people have a job that is designed to help, you should always be trying to listen. Sometimes it doesn't work, but it's a good idea. I agree. Awesome. Thank you. All right. That's great. Thank you. I appreciate it. And like I say, we're not rushing out. So if anyone wants to talk more about stories and storytelling, I'd be happy to. So I just have one last story that I think is a good way to end my time here this morning. The first time I was out in Winnipeg, I end up going to Winnipeg a lot, a couple times a year. Get a lot of work out there. I'll be out there again in a couple months. It's just become a highlight of my calendar year when I get to work in Winnipeg telling stories. The first time that I was ever in Winnipeg was in the back of an ambulance in the pouring rain. And that is the best beginning to a story I'll ever have. So I was at a camp not far from here, actually, in Kenora, a few hours from here, telling stories and stuff, and outside of Kenora, and on a day off or in between sessions or something, we drove into town to pay some bills and do some banking and all that sort of grown-up stuff that you have to do, even when you're away at camp. And on the way back out of town, we had bought a bag of apples from a local merchant. So we're driving along, pulling out of town onto the Trans-Canada Highway and eating these apples. And my 11-month-old son, who was munching away on an apple, started to choke. Now, this wasn't regular little guy choking. This was like excessive drool, face going purple, eyes rolling back in his head kind of choking. And so I turned the car around and drove frantically through town looking for the hospital. It was about a 3-minute drive, but it felt like it took the rest of my life. And at this point, it wasn't even raining. So we finally sort of found our way to the emergency department there at the Kenora Hospital, and I burst through those doors with my little guy in my arms. I was as nervous and as worried as the day he was born. So they finally, got us into this room, and they were doing tests and x-rays and imaging and stuff, and they determined that there was indeed a piece of apple stuck down in one of the wrong pipes that was preventing him from breathing properly. And so now I'm pacing around the lobby of the Kenora Hospital, waiting for this, drinking vending machine coffee, waiting for this medical team to decide whether they will operate on his little 11-month-old throat or send him off to the sick kids hospital in Winnipeg, where they can deal with this sort of thing better. Next thing I know, I'm climbing into the back of an ambulance with a doctor and a nurse and my 11-month-old son strapped to a hospital bed. And he's kicking and screaming and flailing and wailing. It was bad enough that he was choking, but now he felt like he was being tortured. And at this point, it was beginning to rain. So as soon as the ambulance started driving, he fell asleep. I don't know if it was the movement of the vehicle or the hum of the motor. I don't know what it was. On the one hand, that was nice because it quieted everything down. But on the other hand, it only heightened my anxiety. Because at least when he was screaming, I knew that he was breathing. So we're driving along the Trans-Canada Highway, and they've got the lights going, and they've got the sirens going, and it's pouring rain, and I'm nervous, and I'm worried, and my hands are all wet, and my mouth was all dry. I'm praying, and it would have taken an act of God to get me to let go of his fat little hand. And then all of a sudden, nurse said, "Where are you from? What are you doing in Kenora?" And I said, "I was working at one of the camps." And they said, "Oh, what kind of work do you do?" And I said, "I'm a storyteller." And they said, "Great." Now I think what she meant by great was that I could entertain them, tell them stories. But clearly I wasn't in the mood to be telling stories to anybody. As a matter of fact, I think great was probably the last thing that got said on that trip. We just spent the next 2 or 3 hours, I spent the next 2 or 3 hours staring at my son and listening to the pouring rain. Now, when they finally got us up to the emergency department of the sick kids in Winnipeg, they fast-tracked us up to the front of the line because he was an infant and they had radioed ahead and that sort of thing. There was more tests, more x-rays, more imaging on his throat. And now he's in a room, he's asleep, he's finally calmed down, and I'm waiting. I'm sitting beside the bed waiting. And it's now, it's probably close to 12 hours after this whole torturous ordeal began. And I'm done physically, emotionally, spiritually. I feel completely spent, totally wasted. I mean, the only thing I even had in me was that vending machine coffee and some peanut M&Ms. And so I'm sitting there feeling completely overrun, when all of a sudden, my little guy opened one eye and then the other. And he looked at me and he smiled. Now, you need to understand something about my son Porter. When he smiles, things change. He's one of those kids with a really round, fat, white head. And when he smiled, it was like a fresh stroke of color on a blank canvas. or like stirring cream into black coffee. And he's laying there, staring at me, smiling, and all I can think of saying is, "Are you crazy? Do you know where you are? Do you know what you've been through? Do you know what you've put me through?" But he's just staring and smiling, like he's trying to tell me something. But he's only 11 months old, so he has no words. And all I've ever done is listened with my ears, so I don't know how to hear what he wants to say. And it's frustrating him that he can't tell me what he wants to say, and it's frustrating me that I can't hear what he wants to say. And so we're both trying to figure this out and trying to understand each other and trying to make sense of the situation, when all of a sudden it hit me. He's smiling because he was okay. He was smiling because somewhere along the line he either swallowed down or spat up that little piece of apple. And now he's looking at me saying, "The show must go on. We got to get back on the horse and ride." Or maybe that we got to stop and smell the roses, or whatever it is they grow there in Winnipeg. He was telling me as clearly as anyone has ever told me anything, that unless you're hurting, you have to be the one that's helping, even if that's just by smiling. And so that's how we spent the rest of the night in that hospital room, just stared at each other and smiled. Look, it's hard to learn how to be a good listener. And it's really humbling when you learn it from an 11-month-old boy. Thanks again for being here this morning, for sharing your time with me. Steve, thanks for having me here, and thank you all very much for listening.